Hello everyone, my name is Clarence White. I'm the Associate Director here at the Eastside Freedom Library. Thank you for coming on what is likely maybe a tiring holiday for a lot of folks, whether it was good or otherwise. I'm glad it's not snowing yet. So yes, I'm glad for that. So we are thrilled that you came out tonight and to be doing this in partnership with the St. Paul Public Libraries. I want to do a few housekeeping things before we get started. Some of you may not know the restrooms are downstairs. There's an elevator over there and stairs over there that will take you down. Just knock on the door and key yourself in. We are live streaming this event. So as our fairly fearless leader, Peter Ratcliffe, who is sorry he can't be here tonight, usually says, if you're in the witness protection program, just know you might want to hide your face or like hide under a chair or something like that. What else? Yes, so in the back is a display that's been set up by Marlon Heiss, who is the person who has done a great job in taking care of the Hmong archives, which live in this corner of the library. We're also thrilled to be in partnership with that as well. And there's also some artwork, some photographs by photographer Gun Lin. So if you have a chance when we're finishing up here, take a look at what's on the table. I think Marlon is going to be around for a little while afterwards, so if you want to have a conversation about what's there, what's over here, that would be great. And I can't think of anything else that I really need to say because the real introduction is going to happen with Dua. So Dua's with the St. Paul Public Libraries, and she will be guiding us from here. Thanks.
Thanks, Clarence. Welcome. My name is Dua, and I work for St. Paul Public Libraries. Tonight, I have my colleagues C, Wayne, Laura here as well, and Deanna Wu, and we all work for St. Paul Public Library. We're so happy and excited to have you here tonight. Thank you for coming on a Friday night. I know that there's lots of other parties going on for the Hmong New Year tonight, so I'm glad that you're here instead. And you still have plenty of time to catch those parties when this is over, because it's at 8 and the party doesn't start until after that, right? First, I want to thank Eastside Freedom Library for collaborating with us and allowing us to have hosting this event. And for those that don't know, this used to be a St. Paul Public Library. It was the Arlington Hills Library. And then now the Arlington Hills Library is housed at the Arlington Hills Community Center. And now it's Eastside Freedom Library. If you've never been here before, I encourage you to come back and check out this really awesome space. There's a lot of great resources here. Peter, Clarence, and Martin, they do a really great job. So please come back and check it out. Tonight, we hope that if we end a little early, you can still look at the space and check out the Hmong archives too. Just a couple of things here. So on their chairs, I laid out some comment cards. Before you leave tonight, if you can fill those out for us, that would be great. Our funding comes from Legacy Amendment, which comes out of your tax dollars. And it goes towards paying for arts and cultural programs like this in the state of Minnesota. So for us to continue receiving these grants, we would love you to fill out our comment card. Let us know how we're doing, if you love the program, what else you want to see. So definitely let us know so that we can keep bringing programs to you like this. And also, we have an upcoming event. So after this event, on December 5th, at the Arlington Hills Community Center with the library there, we're bringing Kao Kalia Yang. She's going to be here to read her new children's book, A Map into the World. And she's going to be reading, and there's going to be also an activity for everyone as well. It's open to all families, so do come. Again, that's December 5th at the Arlington Hills Community Center. We have some flyers for you as well. As for the event tonight, You'll get an opportunity to ask Neng some questions. If you are a little bit shy about asking the questions, we do have some paper that we've cut out and pens in the back. You're welcome to fill those out and we will do the asking. Otherwise, you are welcome to ask the questions that you like. As we go throughout the program, you can raise your hand and ask questions. We also have some other questions planned as well. So, all right, without much more ado, we'll have Neng come up here. Neng gained his popularity through social media from his travels. I follow him, and because I'm also a world traveler myself, and I enjoy looking at people's videos and people are going, and just learning about different countries. Neng is here tonight to talk about his travels, share some of his stories, and allow you an opportunity to ask him questions that you always wanted to ask him when you see his vlogs. He's also going to share with us some traditional Hmong instruments as well, and so we're really looking forward to that, and perfect timing for the Hmong New Year. All right, so Neng, you can come up here. All right, let's all give him a big...
Hey, thank you everyone for being here. This means a lot to me to have so many people here. So as was already said, a lot of my, I guess, well known for my Facebook videos that I make, but what always makes it the best and what makes all of it worth it is being up here and being able to actually see real people's faces and shake your hands and etc. etc. So it means a lot for me to be here today. I want to talk about traveling, yes, and seeing the world, but kind of center that around what I've been obsessed with for the past 2 years, which is the Hmong whistle language. I think, and I'm really biased, but I really do think it is the most musical language in the world. And when I was growing up, my grandparents, they talked about beautiful places in Laos. I shot this footage when I was back, when I was there during this New Year, just almost 12 months ago now, but just absolutely gorgeous landscape. And they used to tell me about times when they would talk like the birds. And I think as a child, sorry, I'm trying to fix this. As a child of war, I over-romanticize that, and I over-romanticize a lot of what they talk about in terms of the whistle language and the musical language, but it really is beautiful, and that's why I've been so obsessed with it. So I want to play a little bit and kind of explain what it is. Back when my grandparents were growing up, and they were, my age, maybe a little bit younger, and they started dating, they would play songs to court to romance their lovers. And what you're hearing is not actually just music. The thing about Hmong music is it's always, always, always a language. I gave a talk at the University of Minnesota on this a couple weeks ago, and a professor asked me, how do you distinguish Hmong music from the Hmong whistle language or the musical language? And I didn't really give a good answer to that, but I'm going to backtrack here a little and talk about what a whistle language is, or what a musical language is in the realm of the Hmong language. So whistle languages are languages that mimic the spoken word through typically whistling, which is why they're called whistle languages. There are also languages that mimic their speech through drums, the African drum languages, and then I think Hmong is really the only language in the world that manipulates music to mimic its spoken word. And this is not a code. This is not like one beep means yes and two beep means no. It's actually the physical acoustics of the sound mimics the spoken word. So that allows speakers who understand the whistle language to actually understand what this person is saying. So what I actually played on the flute right here, the bamboo recorder, a whole bunch of different names for it, but it's a song typically maybe a boy would play as he walks around to a different towns during the New Year or something. And it talks about, I've traveled such a long way to be here in this town or this place, wherever he is, and I have no loved one. And I'm searching for a girlfriend, and I'm searching for that one who's perfect for me. And if you understand the Hmong whistle language, you would hear these actual words within the music. So for example, if I just play a sound and I just simply blow, it's maybe you would say ooh, 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 but if I tongue it, we call it in Western music, you hear that T and it kind of mimics the T in the spoken. And if I do a P sound, I can actually do it with my lips. And that mimics the P's in the spoken language. And then Hmong also is what's called a tonal language. So depending on how you say a word, and I'm going to go over this a little bit later, so I'm going to go over that later, but I want to talk about this whole concept of New Year's that I'm in St. Paul, I'll be at the River Center tomorrow, and the next day I'm enjoying New Year's. And the first time I traveled to Laos, it was Tapon Savan was the first New Year I saw, and it was an enormous New Year. There were a lot of people. This day was actually rainy, so there actually weren't that many people there. Usually that whole stadium right there is completely just full. You can't even walk through it. So it was very similar to the New Year's here in the U.S. in that people who come here, they have a way to travel there. And there was this enormous gathering of Hmong people celebrating the New Year. But as I drove back to Vientiane, I saw all these tiny villages where it was super intimate, where we stopped at villages like this one, and there were 4 girls right there. The other people that aren't these 2 kids, those are friends from the U.S. that are traveling with me, relatives actually. But these girls, they just stay there all day, and they do what's called tossing ball. So they toss ball, and this is kind of like a meaningless activity for Hmong people, just to have an excuse to talk to each other when you're chatting up a girlfriend or a boyfriend. It kind of just gets rid of the awkward silence. And when I saw this, I was like, wow, this is like such an intimate setting. It's also really sad because there are just like 4 people and these 4 girls, and they just wait there all day, like all week, waiting to see if there's like a boy that will come talk to them. But it was very special, and it was the first time I kind of saw that experience that my grandparents were always talking about. This is actually the town that they lived in. And if you look at the bottom left corner here, you actually see us tossing ball. But yeah, just kind of there's that main road, and they just toss ball right by the road the whole day. Absolutely just like serene, definitely very secluded, and I felt very, very privileged to be able to see places like this. So this is a picture of me as a 5-year-old kid. This was the first school picture, I think like actually the first day of school, and went to school, and I took this photo, and I didn't know what the teacher meant when she was like smile, because I didn't speak English, right? So I came home and I showed my mom this picture like a few weeks later once it was developed, and I remember my mom took one look at it and she goes, "You do not know how to smile." I like never smiled since then, but you know, I've been working on that in the past few years, right? But I remember growing up, and kids learn languages really, really fast, and I remember, I think it was like a month into school, we were standing in line going in line like to recess or something, and I turned around and my backpack hits this kid that's standing behind me, and he goes, "Miss Schroeder, Neng hit me." And Miss Schroeder turns to me and is like, "Neng, did you do that on accident or on purpose?" And at this point, I already spoke English like pretty well, because you know kids learn really fast, but I didn't know the difference. So I said I hit him on purpose, and I got in trouble, and I was still so confused. And I went home that night. I remember this like it happened yesterday, but we were in the family van, and my dad was driving, and I was in the passenger seat, and I turned to my dad, I unbuckle, and I go up to him and I ask him, "What's the difference between," and this is a conversation in Hmong, I asked him, "What's the difference between on purpose and on accident?" And he explained to me the difference in Hmong, and then he asked me why I asked, and I told him the story, and he just laughed, because it was like dark humor to him, I guess, like his kid was getting in trouble for something that he didn't mean to, but he felt bad. We went to Hardee's, we got some ice cream, and we got, one of those soft serve ice creams that's like this tall. but it was like, this time of year, and it was cold, and I had to eat ice cream, and I had gotten in trouble, so it was just like an overall bad experience. But I think this kind of like struggle of learning language has kind of manifested itself throughout the years for me to learn a whistle language. So going back to what that is, again, whistle languages mimic the spoken word through typically whistles. That's why it's called a whistle language, and you find whistle languages in every continent except Antarctica, which, it's not super surprising because only penguins live there, really. But in the world, there are about 7,000 languages, and of those 7,000, only 70 are whistle languages. So languages that mimic their spoken word through whistling. So that's only 1% of all the world's languages. And what makes Hmong even more unique is that it's mimicked not just through whistle, but also through music. This is probably one of the first scientific documentations of that. This is by a linguist in France. And so this was published in 2005. And this sentence is and that means I come over here, let's go kill some game, or like let's go kill whatever you kill to have a meat. And you can see the top part is the spoken language, and then the bottom is the whistle language. And the spectrographs are basically identical, which means that it's not just that they're playing a sound and they're saying, hey, this means this. It really is reduplicating the speech through the music, through the whistling, and I think that's phenomenal. Now, one thing that makes Hmong able to do this is that it's tonal, and most whistle languages are tonal languages, and they are based on how a word is said, changes what its meaning is. So my name is, so in Hmong spelling, this will make what I'm about to say easier. But in Hmong spelling, a word is basically composed of 3 parts. You have that consonant at the beginning, and then you have a vowel, and then you have what's called a tone marker, and that's the last letter of the word. So the last letter of the word indicates the tone that you say a word in, and depending on how you say a tone, it completely changes what the word means. So we have your high tone, the B, and my name is Neng, right? If you say Neng, that's my name. So in the musical scale, you can think of it as do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Instead of saying mi, if you said do, re, neng, instead of do, re, mi, neng is my name. But instead of do, if you said neng, re, mi, neng means horse. So Neng is horse, Neng is my actual name. So Neng is my name if it ends in a B. If it ends in any other letter that's not one of these other 6, that's Neng. And in some dialects of Hmong, if you say Neng Neng, that means like stilts. And then you have words ending in S, Neng, which means horse. A J, which is Neng, which means life. And then you have V, which is Neng, which is in the Hmong dialect, that means like a bow and arrow, like the bow of the bow and arrow. You have Neng, and words ending in M, Neng. In Hmong religion, Dam Neng. Neng is like a spirit that protects the forest or serves the forest and serves you when you go hunting or stuff. So people that believe in the Dam Neng, they will kind of traditionally offer, give offerings to the Dam Neng before they go hunting. Then you have words that end in G, which is Neng, and that means a person. And then you have this D tone that's kind of mysterious, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. I think that the D tone is a tone that starts with any of these 7, and then it kind of ends in the mid-tone. And all of these different tones, mid, high, low, high falling, mid rising, low falling, mid falling, breathy, how you say that word completely changes what it means. And in the acoustics of whistle languages and music, this is really what makes Hmong able to be whistled in such intricate ways. So the research that I've been doing the past 2-some years as I travel across all of these Hmong populations and the world in general is to document, sorry guys, is really to document the Hmong whistle language and how it mimics its own spoken language, because not a lot of people have done this, and I think we really are in the last generation where whistle languages, not just the Hmong whistle language, but whistle languages in general will exist. Typically they're used in settings where you don't see the other person and you need to be able to communicate, whether that's long distance or through the night, and that's what has allowed them to grow historically, but now we have cell phones, we have texting, we have all these types of communication that make whistle languages kind of obsolete. So I think this is the last chance ever to document whistle languages, and for the Hmong language that's even more important because there's no other language in the world that mimics the spoken language through music in such intricate ways. And this is music, again, on so many different instruments because it's not just the flute. I'll play a few more instruments, but it's every Hmong instrument. So you see all of these things around. Every Hmong instrument, I see a 2-string violin right there. The Hmong call that gong ya. A lot of people now know it as a seesaw, but that's actually a Lao word. Gong ya is a 2-string violin. So Hmong is a language that really needs to be documented. So this is for one style of music, for typically the tamblai, and the tamblai is the free reed. The reed is made out of brass, and it mimics language as well, of course. And with the tamblai, this is in the key of G in Western music, but all of these tones are represented by specific notes. So in the key of G, the tones that are N and J can be represented by the letter or the note A, and then you have S with D, blank and G with the note E, B and D with F, and then D is this kind of transition tone. So in this sentence down here, which means it's so clear, my sweet, beautiful, beautiful girl, it corresponds, every single note has to correspond to its tone in the Hmong language. And the reason for this is kind of unclear. I think there's an intrinsic property to the Hmong language that makes it allowed to be whistled. For example, when I was talking about the tonal scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, the Hmong tones fit in there perfectly, and you also replicate that when you're saying it in English. So I think that's an intrinsic property of the Hmong language that just magically developed over time, by chance, and that's allowed Hmong to become this whistle language. So, of course, music isn't always played in the key of G. So you have, in all musical keys, what's more important is what's called the interval. So the difference between musical notes. And in Hmong, in the style of the tamblai, the tone of the M and the J to the S, the difference is what's called 5 half steps. So in music, notes, in physics I guess, notes differ based on the frequency of, notes differ how notes sound, you perceive them differently because their frequencies change. I'm kind of going to zoom through this, but if we go back here, and I'll play this, but basically, all of these tones have to correspond to the notes, right? So on this, when you start whistling, and this is not just for the Hmong whistle language, this is actually for a lot of whistle languages. It's typically done in settings where you don't see the other person. So you need a way to tell the other person that, hey, I'm going to start talking. And when I'm talking to you face to face, you know I'm going to start talking because of subtle facial cues, etc., etc. But in how Hmong does it is that at the beginning of each separate thought, we play a kind of nonsense phrase. So for most Hmong Americans, you would notice that in Guitia is part of the whistle languages as well. And in Guitia, for the Hmong that are from the province of Sengkuang, that starting phrase is niae, and that kind of starts like, hey, I'm going to start talking, like, you better pay attention. Now on the flute, it's the words are ndue, which kind of translates to like, oh world, because whatever you're saying, you want the world to know. So that's, and then, so ndue, tane chandung dia, kutumen hong kau, tujuh jong kau. mimicked through the sound, the music, the note that corresponds to the tone, and the tones don't sorry again, I always say note because that's easiest to kind of visualize in your head, but again, what's most important is actually the interval. So in the tamblai, again, the lowest interval in that step is the N and the J tone, and then you have the S, the G, the B, the B, and the D corresponding to the other notes. So let's take just like Hmong has 8 tones. Let's say if you take this sentence again, and you draw out the tone of each specific word, it would be S, M, V, J, G, S, V, S, blank, S, J, S, blank, blank, J, blank. And then down here, I have all of the difference in the musical interval. If you hear that musical interval and you are if you really understand the Hmong language and the whistle language as well, your brain just realizes that the only words that would make sense for that interval are this like specific combination of words. And it's really, really hard to understand unless you do know the whistle language, because it's very similar to recognizing a tone in English, or a tune in English, sorry, but much more complex, because this might be a tune that you have never heard in your entire life, but your brain will automatically decode the words, and it's just, it's phenomenal. What we learn through whistle languages is that your brain, so typically for most people, the language is processed on the left side of your brain. It's largely processed in the left side of your brain, and the part of language that is processed in the right side of your brain, the right hemisphere, tends to be those cues like sarcasm or emotional cues that's beyond the words. Like if I say, I hate you, that means I really hate you, right? But if I say like, I hate you, it's like kind of joking, right? And that emotion part is processed in the right side of their brain. So most of language is processed on the left side of the brain. When we study whistle languages, we notice that it's almost 50-50. So whistle language speakers process whistle language in both hemispheres of their brain. And you're like, oh, that's cool. Where's that applicable in life? There's a paper written, I think, just 2 years ago, and they talked about the possibility of teaching people with stroke victims who have damage on the left side of the brain, reteaching them to talk through using whistle language, because that will allow them to use the right side of their brain to talk instead of the left side of their brain. And we know through, there are cases where like babies have seizures, and they, as infants, before they can talk, and the seizures or the stroke damages their left side of their brain. We know once they get up, or once they grow up, and we do brain scans, we see that language switches to the right side of their brain. So there's this brain plasticity that little kids have that adults don't have. That's why kids can learn languages so fast. But this idea of language being processed in the left versus right hemisphere is very interesting for whistle languages as well. Now you're saying like, this is just a tone, and Hmong also does it through, Hmong also, again, when I talked about that, mimicking the consonants and the vowels as well. So, you know, Western music notation, staff notation is not perfect for it at all, but you have soft consonants like the T's, and then you have softer consonants like the P's or the M's or the N's that are mimicked differently through, in Western music we call it ornamentation. So there's all these complex things that Hmong music has that also doesn't exist in Western music, but this is my kind of like best attempt to explain it, or like to equivocate it. So Hmong has 58 tonal consonants, and then 14 vowels and 8 tones, and all of that is kind of mimicked through, it can be mimicked through its music. Something in language, also reduplication. Reduplication is when you're like, is he here, or is he like here, and here means like he's actually right where I'm standing, right? Now, reduplication happens in a lot of languages, and in Hmong it also happens, but the cool thing about Hmong whistle language is that it happens to an extreme amount. So if you say a phrase, basically every single line will have reduplication in there, and I think the purpose of that is because whistle languages are, by in effect, more ambiguous. So by repeating things, it sounds good, the music sounds better because you're repeating elements of the music, but it also allows whistlers to understand the language and to re-catch something if they miss it. So, for example, in this phrase, every single line has a form of reduplication. And in this phrase, if you get rid of every single reduplication, it still makes perfect sense. But yet it exists, and it exists only in the spoken language. If you were to speak this specific paragraph in spoken Hmong, people would look at you like, why are you sounding like a broken record? And you also see this a lot in Gwitia. So Gwitia, I think, for Hmong Americans, is the most able to be grasped part of the whistle language, because they are still spoken words, but a lot of it is what we would say balu, or kind of like hidden words, or like more older words, or we say a lot of things to make it more musical. For example, third person is used a lot, so you wouldn't say like gu, which is me, you might say like "Zilen guli gu," and then you have like you might say something like "tuo," but when you sing Gwitia, you want to make it longer, so you might say it 3 different times, so you say it in 3 different ways. So the example I have here, instead of saying "tuo," when you sing Gwitia, you might say something like and then that makes it sound more musical. You might have a phrase like "Jay Xiao Dong," which means like house on the hill, but in Gwitia, you might say something like "Jay Chung Tao Talia," and that kind of means like, it's kind of redundant, but it makes the music work, and it just sounds good. And this is like a philosophical question, right? Like, what makes like music sound good? Like, why does music sound good? And I was reading through this kind of like research into that the other day, and they talked about Pythagoras, and the guy who explained Pythagorean theorems, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, but he was one of the first like people to question what makes music sound good. So sometimes when I'm talking about this music, I might just be like, oh, it just sounds good if you say that. And I don't really know why, it just does. But that's my question for you, what makes music sound good? So as I learned these whistle languages, this is a Pukun mountain in Laos, the big, really obvious mountain there, but I drove past all these villages and throughout the mountainsides and the villages of Laos, and I really began to realize why, despite the war, Laos is one of the most bombed countries in the world. So despite the war, despite all of this, my grandparents still talked so fondly about this country and about all these memories, and I went back to thinking about how I might be over-romanticizing Laos, but really, I think the whistle language is what keeps me so entertained with traveling. I whistle languages in Mexico and every kind of country that I go to. So this is a closer view of Pukun Mountain. In Hmong, there's this phrase called, it's Koshia, which in English, there's really no good translation. I actually asked my brother Kelly there the other day, and I was like, Kelly, what do you think Koshia means in English? And he said, it means sad. And I said, I guess it's not like, it doesn't mean happy for sure, but I don't think it means like sad, Koshia, if you break it down, ko means like to fix, and then shia, in Hmong we use the liver for all the emotions, not the heart, so it's your liver broken, your liver distressed, you're the other half of my liver. But koshia means to fix your liver, so it implies that something good is happening, right? It implies that something good is happening. But koshia, it also is, you only use that when you're kind of nostalgic or reminiscent of the past, and those are 2 words that Kelly came back with. He was like, it has to be like reminiscent or like nostalgia, because, babies, they can't be koshia. You have to have like life experience to be koshia. And I think when I was like here, this place, I was finally like, wow, I really do feel like koshia, Well, I traveled a lot of different places to see Hmong people as well, and this is in Ha Giang, in northeastern Vietnam. I really do think that Ha Giang is the most beautiful place on earth. And even within each country, within Laos, within Vietnam, within Thailand, whatever country I go to, there are so many different places, and I always go back twice, right? This was Sapa, Vietnam, and when I got here, I was like, wow, this is like Patagonia, except that I don't have to pay like $1,000 to see it, because to get to Patagonia, you have to pay like $1,000. You know, all the expenses add up. This cost me a $6 bike rental for the day, and it was warm, it was beautiful. But in these beautiful places, again, I explored the Hmong whistle languages, and I explored different types of guitia and music and intervals, and how the Hmong dialects mimicked their language. And I really began to learn a lot about the Hmong language and the Hmong whistle language that I never expected to learn. And I think like a lot of people don't know. So the other day I was singing a guitia style, and my mom was laughing at me because she had never heard this style of guitia, and she was like, God, guitia, you know, like, you're completely wrong. And then I showed her a video of this guy singing guitia in the same exact style, and she like, didn't say anything anymore. But it like really shows that we have so much to learn, like even as people who think we're really knowing, right? So in these places I met amazing people. This is my friend Bay, and I spent about like over a month living with him and his family. They showed me so many wonderful things of Vietnam. He took me also to Ha Giang, and again, this is so Ha Giang is northeastern Vietnam. Bay, who you just saw, lives in Sapa, which is northwestern Vietnam, and just some of the most beautiful scenery I've ever seen. I think like Ha Giang is probably where like I want to get married, because it's just like absolutely just, it's like the end of the earth if I had to like explain it. And here I also met a lot of Hmong people. So these were Hmong Dao from Ha Giang, and their clothes is a little different than the Hmong Dao from Laos. So one thing that surprised me a lot is I was there during New Year's, and so my mom is Neng Now, and my dad is Hmong Dao. So I kind of mixed both dialects, and I think I do a pretty good job at understanding and even speaking both dialects. The Hmong in Sapa, most Hmong in Sapa are Hmong, they speak the Hmong dialect. And when I was there, it was like very different than my mom's Hmong. So for example, Hmong has an H when you say it in, it has an H sound when you say it in white Hmong, but when you say it in green Hmong, it's Hmong. But in Sapa, they do use the H, so it's Hmong. But everything else is very similar to the Hmong from Laos. And then you go like further east, and then you meet the Hmong in Ha Giang. And this is my friend Peng and his mom. And one thing with their Hmong dialect that struck me was they were talking, and they I feel bad saying this, but it almost is like if you took their dialect and you asked a Hmong Lao person what they sound like, they might say like, oh, the Hmong from Ha Giang, they sound like little kids, because when they speak, they'll say like, I remember someone came up to me and was like, oh, and I was like, you're speaking like a little kid right now. But this is like how they speak. Instead of go, so they don't have that consonant at the beginning, and it makes it softer sounding. But ime means like jinzang, so they use that. And I think like learning all these dialects of Hmong kind of like really exemplified for me the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is when you start learning something, you basically think like, oh, I'm so good at this already, because you know the beginnings are easy, and then as you learn more, you begin to realize like, oh wow, I know like absolutely nothing about this. And then when you are like the world expert, you still, you know that you're like the world expert, and you know that you know more than other people, but you still know that there's so much more to learn. So I think I sum it up as, you know, more you know that you know less. And that's what it's been traveling for me, you know, kind of learning not just my Hmongness, but just like the human condition in general. Back in Ha Giang here, this is a scene of the Hmong people farming. These are ladies you see on the cliff, and if they fall off, really they would just die. Like, I can't even believe people live in places like this, but they do, and they've find ways to make it work, and it's absolutely incredible. And when I was talking to them, I think when I went there with my friend Bay, and we were talking about like the differences in Hmong customs with Peng and his mom, and we talked about marriage and dating and courtship, and there was a conversation that came up that Bay was like, one of my, you know, like relatives, he had like a girl over, and they were like, she was like helping us like harvest, and then she didn't go home that night because it was like really late. So then the next morning her parents called and were like super upset that their daughter didn't come home, so they forced them to get married. They're like, yo, right? And for Hmong law, for Laotian Hmong, it's like, that's not that weird either. It's just like something that, you know, very conservative communities kind of see over and over. And so, you know, we were talking about this to Peng and his mom, and she looked at us. She was like, wow, you guys are like that. You guys you know, and which means like you guys are still, it's almost like you guys are that uptight or something like that, right? And she told us that that's not how it is for the Hmong people in Hazang. And so I was like really shocked about that. And then we talked more, and I was talking about ball earlier, you know, ball tossing, and I'm gonna come back to what I'm saying. I'm gonna go off a little bit of a tangent here, but ball tossing, I think for the Hmong in Laos, ball tossing, we just like don't know how to meet a girl or a boy if we're not ball tossing, you know, and it's changing in the US, but traditionally it's like if you're not tossing ball, you're not gonna meet somebody because that's just like what you do to like find a loved one. And the thing about tossing ball for Hmong people is it's only a Hmong thing in Laos. The Hmong in like any other country, they don't toss ball. And so that really means that this tradition of tossing ball that you see at the Hmong New Year's, that's really only evolved in the past like 150 years, more or less. So when I was talking to my great-grandpa before he passed, he told me that his great-grandpa is the one that came from China that migrated down to escape the genocide and the war and all that stuff that was happening in China. So my family's been out of China for 7 generations, and for Hmong Americans, I'm willing to bet you that it's plus or minus 1 generation maximum. So that really only translates, you know, 7 generations is really only, let's say like you have a kid when you're 20, that's really only like 140 years or so, you know, 20 times 7. And so in Hazang, they don't toss ball, and I was there during New Year's, and I was talking to them, and I was like, how do you guys like meet girls if you don't toss ball? And this is my friend Peng and his cousin Ba, they're Hmong Xiao, and they're telling me how they meet girls and their tradition of what they say like chu is how they meet a girl, and this is how they do it. I'm gonna let Ba describe.
Tổ chia cái mù cho mình tốt nhiều sai lúa cái nhiều mình chia nó nhưng từ lầnนั้นchia mình chia một chia cáiวิชาที่nó có tiền là cũng như sẽ thành rồi là kho tiền đầu trừ nó có rất cái đầu trừ rồi nó mà cái nó sẽ là nhiều rất cái đầu trừ cái từ giờ ít đồ mình tốt vì sao ít đồ mình tốt phù mình bỏ ít đồ mình nhiều dùng cao mình nhiều anh nhiều mà ta chỉ ít đồ chỉ ta chỉ phải đồ nó mà cứ tăng một cái mà mình chỉ bảo là trả cho yêu trả thì mình đào tạo từ nhiều lắm con đấy 2 lô CP lô cái nó mà ta chỉ người yêu mù người đẹp đúng mùa cũng thân lái đẹp chịu vượt tao và người yêu mù tao ít đẹp chịu nó quá tiền nó tại mà mình thêm đào tạo nhiều lắm con rồi chỉ khá cái nó mặt rồi chỉ khá cái ta khá ít đồ cái khá học ít đồ rồi chỉ học là khá chỉ học là cái chuyện chả cái con nó nhiều ít so cái cũng chơi nên là cái cho ít so cái cho lò rẻ rong xuyên nên là cái cho cái gì mong cái cho mình mong nó là.
Yeah, so that was like their icebreaker. You know, you don't know a girl, she's cute, you walk up to her and you slap her on the butt. And I was thinking like, and Bay was there, Bay heard this too, and he was like, no way, I don't believe that at all, right? And we were like, I was like, that's like sexual assault. And you know, it's not like an aggressive grope, this is like an oxymoron, but it's like a friendly, you know, pat on the butt, and yeah, it's like how can like sexual assault be like a friendly, right? But yeah, you don't know a girl, you just like want to talk to her, and that's like how you break the ice. And I was like, well, yeah, that would definitely break the ice for me, right? But it was like differences like this in the Hmong cultures that I was like, wow, I have like if I have like this much to learn about like my own culture, like the world has like even way more to offer. And a lot of the other countries that I've been traveling to are Spanish-speaking countries, so I've been learning and practicing Spanish since I was 13, so that's literally half my life now. I'm 26, so 13 years learning Spanish. So a lot of the countries, like 70% of the countries I've traveled to are Spanish-speaking countries, and I have so much to learn about Latino culture, Spanish culture, and Spanish-speaking culture, all of these countries, and I feel like it was just like such, and I've always known this, and we all know this, but to see something like this, you really like are put into the frame of, wow, I had no idea, I would have never guessed, and that is, was very interesting. And at the end, actually, Paul, he says something, he says, shika, he says, Otuma, shika, shika, and when I was there for the first day in Hazong, they invited me to drink, and we were drinking around a table, and they said, oh, bây giờ cái chai hậu chở tụi nó mà đi chở này cho cái chai tụi nó chở không lo, nó chở không bị cáo. Bây tụi nó có hậu chở mà có sạc xịt khá, nó bây giờ có xịt khá nó xíu. And I thought, in my dialect, the moment I hear ka, it's like kateng, right? It's like you're dueling with someone, you're like about to fight. And so I like immediately answered like, oh, kuchikana, They were like offended by that, obviously. And they weren't like offended, but it was like 30 seconds later, they were like, someone made the connection. It was Bae, who's from Sapa, and he goes like, what does shika mean? And I was like, it means like you're gonna like fight each other, right? And then he was like, no, shika just means like you're gonna talk to each other. And go shika, shikana. So when Paul says like shika, shikana, they'll talk to each other, and then they'll get to know if like they like each other, if they fit through conversation, normal relationship stuff. As the week went on, I spent about a week and a half with Peng and his family and his community here, and we were talking to his mom, and we were talking about marriage and like just Hmong customs in general, because this has been like an absolute fascination with me. But we were talking about this, again, going back to what I was talking before this conversation, like forced marriage, basically, you have to do type with and then Peng's mom heard this, and Peng's mom was like, wow, you guys still do that? That's crazy. And this is what Peng's mom had to do to say about it. And when I heard this, I was like, what? That's crazy. I can't believe like that exists in Hmong culture. And I think like, because I have grown up in such a like conservative region of Hmong culture, and for some people they hear that and they'll be like, so what? But I think as a Hmong person with roots from Laos, I found that really, really surprising. And then I traveled back to Laos, and this has to all do with kind of like whistle languages, because it has to do with courting. But I talked to Hmong elders in Laos as well, and what I found out was that people have kind of, there's no like culture that's like, there's no people, not culture. There's no people that's like 100% well behaved. We always think like we have this idea of like being quote unquote well behaved and like reserved, but I think that really just doesn't exist in the purest form that we'd like it to. So my background is in science, in stem cell biology, and one of the scientists I studied throughout college was, I'm also obsessed with astronomy, so the children's book I wrote was on the Big Bang Theory, but one of the astronomers I was always obsessed with was Kepler, and he was one of the first scientists to propose that the orbits of the planets were not perfect circles, and thereby he got like jailed and all this stuff because he was going against what the church said, that everything in the heavens is perfect, so everything is a perfect circle. But so basically Kepler was an amazing scientist, but what he got wrong was he also wrote a biology textbook, and in his biology textbook I believe he wrote that the human gestation period was 7 months, because from the time his parents got married and he was born was 7 months. So very interesting fact. But as I traveled through Laos, I was like, what I had seen in Hazong here, I was like, I really want to explore like that part of dating and like stuff with the Hmong culture. So there's this is Danjang, the mouth harp. I'll play some of it right now actually, but I'm gonna move over there and do it. So I have this lapel mic for it because it's very quiet, and let's see how well this works. I think actually ganja is the most obvious whistled instrument because with something like these flutes, even with the flutes, I'll play some of the leads I brought later, but what you're doing is using the reed to serve as your vocal cord, and you're using the instrument and your hands to kind of serve as your mouth cavity. But with something like the ya, you're actually using your real mouth. And I'm gonna make this super obvious. But I'm gonna make it super obvious so that you can really hear the words. So we talked about on the tam lai when baby na and the lu hao and then using or something like that. For the ja the lu hao it's bivo or some people say like and then they'll start saying like what they actually want to say. These nonsense words at the beginning, again, as I said, they set the like, hey, listen to me, but they also set the musical octave. So Hmong people say, so there's I'll demonstrate it again on the recorder, but Hmong people say it has so depending on how hard you blow, the octave changes, and that also sets the musical octave. So for this, for example, if I were to say, Guyot kia kia, Guyot kia, like Guyot kia to top ate to tong do no. Guyot kia means like I will run, but when you put run together, it means like I will travel. So Guyot kia kia. So that's like really obvious, but you wouldn't play it that obviously, because you're trying to make it, you're balancing the musical aspect of it and the actual words, right? So. So, good to make Hmong go very enjoy. And when there's also a lot of vocab that's not used in the spoken word. So when I say "jua" is a word that Hmong Laotians don't use except in Guitia. So "jua" is the same as "seng," which means like what's your last name. So when I say it means like and Guitia, you hear it too. But in Guitia, for example, in the style of Samnua, you will say like something like that. Sometimes when you sing like a ton of different musical styles, they all get mixed together. But what I was saying on the ja, so there's this saying that Hmong Blah have that I think kind of revealed, like, I gave part of this talk to Century College the other day, and these kids came up to me, these college students came up to me afterwards, and they said, Neng, you like spilled the beans on all of our OGs and like their like practices. So there's a palu, a proverb that Hmong Blah say, and it's about whistled language, and it has to do with courtship. It says, "Sao teng tao ta nhu, zeng ya tao deng bu." And some people are laughing, they obviously understand what that means. Nhu and bu rhyme, so that's what makes it a proverb. But all Hmong proverbs basically rhyme. So "Sao teng tao ta nhu" refers to if you play the teng, which are all these instruments up here on the wall. This thing over here, all the way on the right, is actually from Hazam. You can tell by how it's built. But the other ones I think are from Laos probably, but this one's from Hazam. But the thing, if you play it at like funerals or religious rituals, typically you get like 3 cow ribs as a like thank you for playing and for doing all these rituals. So that's where the "Tsakeng Tao Ta Nhu" comes from. And then the one is It means like, literally it means if you know the mouth part, and then you get to smash mushrooms, and mushrooms being like a butt, I guess it would be like the equivalent of like the peach emoji in modern day texting. But anyway, yeah, the ya is used like at night, right? You would travel at night and you would go talk to a girl. These houses are bamboo, so you could play the ya. So the whistle language on the ya is useful because you're also not seeing the other person. So you need a way to be like, hey, I'm going to start talking. Hey, I'm done talking. Now it's your turn to talk. So all these cues that exist in the whistle language, right? At the end of sentences in the whistle language, in Hmong we also say like, ya or yo, and that means like, oh, I'm done talking. Like now it's your turn to talk. When we talk face to face, we do that through like facial cues or like voice cues that are really subtle, but it's harder to do that on whistle languages. And I was talking to all these elders in Laos, and they began like really telling me like how Hmong courtship worked on like the side that no one really talks about, the like hush-hush side. And that's like always what I'm interested in and is like what people don't talk about because I'm always like itching for that knowledge, right? So there was this saying that this proverb, being that the fact that it just exists, tells you a lot of things about like romance and culture in in Hmong culture. But you're probably like, Neng, you're just like making this up. But yeah, you would go to as some elders put it, they would be like. I would work in the fields in Laos. I would work in the fields. We would work from when the sun rises, the chickens crow. We would work from 5 a.m. all the way till when it got too hot to work. Like 2, 3, you're hungry and you already ate all the lunch that you packed to the field. Then you would come back, and then you would come back home, and it would be like 4, maybe 5 o'clock, and then it was like dark already by the time you ate dinner. So you would still have to like walk to your girlfriend's house, and you would walk. And if you're walking in the mountainsides. You might only walk like a few miles, but it might take like a few hours to walk there, and then you have to walk those few hours back. So let's just like assume this is like a 2 to 3 hour walk. And as like an elder told me, it was like, what, you're just gonna walk like 4 hours just to go like play a song on the dot for your girl? Like that doesn't make any sense, right? So I'm not saying like people were like so liberal or anything, but it really gives it like insight into like dating. And my whole like thesis of this is not about like dating specifically, but it's really about learning about different aspects of your own culture or your own being that allows you to have a bigger view of the world, right? So this is Li Zai. Li Zai is probably, I would describe him as like one of the first Hmong scholars. So when the Hmong escaped Laos and went to the refugee camps, he was among like the first Hmong people to record Utia and record music language on the cha, the flute, and ja, the leaf and everything. So this is him explaining the ya, because a lot of what I'm saying right now, it doesn't have validity because I'm a young person, so I never like experienced this firsthand. But this is what Li Zai has to say about it.
Mày có hay lo được gì cũng lo có tôi vừa nó mà chỉ đâu hay na mà thành phải mình mà tôi lo hay tôi coi thì tôi nó phải làm lại vừa mà tôi nó coi thì tôi tập cái thứ này tôi cho mà tan chạm nó đi lúc ra mi to của mấy cặp là cái ông đi nè mà cho nó cái mình nó đi đến rồi gì nó thì muốn cho thì tôi rồi mà cho thì vivo có nhiều có khánh lợi thì khánh nghe quý lợi chỉ ở đây có sự lợi thì có niệm có tình yêu ở trong hè là phụ lợi là có từ hàng có phụ sa là có nhau có tiền lời ưng có tiền đâu ở sao mình có không nghe có của những cái lợi thì trong hè có yêu hải đi cả cho cụ hệ có yêu tây cụ là chỉ tây họ mình có mong nghề nè mà lúc xưa nó mà cho cũng chân thành mà sầu ra kia giả thì nó có cố rồi chỉ thầu tụ rồi chúa tay đi nó để nó chỉ chúa tan là chỉ chỉ thế nè một kiện ta nhìn nó có win ta theo mà giờ thì nó có chỉ mua là chỉ yêu tâm của chúa đó thì nó có mà chúa thì vivo tí lên tu giờ tí lên tu cũng được xem nó có tụi mình có vậy có gì là có tụi nó có này cũng được xem tại đó có anh này tí lên tu tụi mình用trời nè rồi tụi nó cóช่วยđi nó là nó gì rồi có ít thì nó có sợ khi trong nè họ thì nhiều người sẽ chậm ban ra nó có quyền được đại tư khi tàu mà cho lòng cô và mình nhiều lần luôn luôn bị một sự để tham gia nữa khi tàu mình thì rồi thì mà khi thì lần từ mà một chỉ tập thì con rồi có thể sử dụng mà tham gia một ai dài nó họ niệm nó thì cái chúa nở lô cái chúa nhà.
Yeah, so I think when I heard like Lee Tsai say this, and it wasn't so much like I wasn't that interested on like the like whole intimate relationship stuff, but I was more interested on like, wow, how come like I never heard about this like growing up? And it was mostly because, you know, in Hmong America we miss so many things of the Hmong culture that get lost through immigration, that get lost to moving through to a new country. And I thought about whistled languages, and a lot of it is really much like the technology we have today. You know, humans by and large haven't changed so much throughout, you know, the past thousands of years. You know, we had long distance communication through chomblong, and then, you know, for the ja, I think it's almost like texting in a way. Like sometimes when you're texting, you have the courage to ask something that you wouldn't ask in real life, right? Because it has like that certain like disconnect to it. And for me, seeing the Hmong whistle language really showed me a different part of the Hmong culture that was beyond just its linguistics and beyond just these practices of mimicking the language, but it really was about delving into how complex the Hmong culture and Hmong society was that I never got, like growing up as a Hmong American. And I think a lot of Hmong Americans, because we miss out on a lot of things like this, we don't really fully appreciate that, wow, Hmong society, Hmong communities were, you know, just as sophisticated and just as developed as anywhere else in the world. And sometimes it manifests itself in this kind of like internalized like shame or hatred. I got an email the other day, and this college student was like, wow, your video about how to play the da and how to mimic the Hmong language through music really has inspired me to learn. And he was doing this amazing job reflecting on how he called it like, I think I have this internalized racism for being Hmong, and this aspect of Hmong culture really showed me how unique it is, because no one else does this with their language, and that really is special. And I think traveling and seeing all of these aspects of my own person has really given me the question of like, what does it mean to be human at large, right? What does the human condition mean, and why are, not necessarily like why are we all here? I don't like that question because it's too like in the clouds, right? But it's really like, yeah, how can we be the best us? And I think that's like why I started traveling. Really, it was just to meet people and to like become the best me. But with that, I really want to like encourage people to ask questions. You know, I can talk forever, but if you have any questions, there's nothing off limits. I'll kind of just like talk about traveling, you know, anything we have about traveling in general, about any culture or language. But right here.
Hi, so two questions. If you're going to travel again, where? And are you planning to settle down again? Because we live our life through you, but is there a time where you're going to be like, oh, I want to stay at one place?
Yeah, so the questions are, am I going to travel again, and to where, and do I ever want to like settle down, quote unquote. And yeah, I think yeah, I'm going to travel again. Definitely going to travel again. I think my next country, probably New Year's, I want to go to like around the beginning of January. I want to go to the Dominican Republic. So the first time I ever traveled abroad, it was through a program called Amigos de las Americas, and I lived with in a rural Panamanian town, and there was like 140 people, and the only person that lived there was one person from the Dominican Republic, so he didn't speak a word of English, and no one else in this rural community spoke English, so that's how I was like forced to learn like how to speak Spanish, but I haven't seen him in 10 years, so I'm gonna go see him. I really want to go to India and Kenya, and in terms of just like settling down, yeah, you know, one day I want a family. I love kids. I'm the second oldest cousin on my dad's side of the family, so you know, I have a ton of younger siblings, younger cousins. So I definitely want to, you know, like get married as well and have kids. But that comes, you know, a little bit later. You know, I probably will go back to school before that happens. There's an amazing book, one of my favorite books that encouraged me to travel, but to like really conceptualize time in like that type of question is The Defining Decade by Meg Jay. And it talks about, she basically spends like 200 pages talking about how there's this saying that 30s is the new 20s, and she spends 200 pages. So she has a PhD, she's a professor, she spends 200 pages saying about how that's not true. She says, you know, 20s is, you know, your 30s is not your new 20s. We live longer nowadays, et cetera, but your 20s are not your 30s. Your 20s are a time for you to really find out who you are. And she goes into like a whole bunch of like history and a whole bunch of, even like, she touches even on like biology and like, especially like the biological clock that half the population has. So, yeah, it's an amazing book. I think every kid in their 20s should read it. But that's, I think like, yeah, long question short, long answer short is, yeah, I want to have kids one day. I want to have a wife. But I'm not sure when. When it happens, it happens.
So you romanticize the language a lot.
Yeah.
Could the whistle language that you talk about be used to insult someone? Like if I wanted to passively say, "Inchi mo today."
Yeah. So
Say that?
yeah, the question is basically like, what are the limitations of the whistle language? So in theory, you can say anything with the whistle language. I think if you said something like, "Oh, I hate you, go away," on the ya, it would be like recognizable and people would understand it because it's such the clearest language. I think if you said it on something like, so the flute, for example, the flutes are used mostly for romance. So because they're so heavily used for romance, if you said that on the flute, people would be confused and they wouldn't be able to like really piece it together. So like whistle languages are very also specific to, you know, they're far from perfect, but they do have their use in like long distance communication, romance and stuff. But for the Hmong language, it's mostly used in like religion and love and these kind of like more fond feelings. You could definitely say that, and I think I can think of examples in it. For example, the word "jata," which means like literally like tiger bite someone, it's like an insult. Sometimes that's used in the flute language as well. Sometimes you would say something like and you say something like or something like that, you know, and it kind of like adds like an anger part to it. In Guitia, obviously you can say anything in Guitia, but Guitia is also part of the whistle language, and a lot of times it's very used in like romance as well. But there's also a lot of Guitia it's like less than beautiful words, right? Or like Guitia, where like they talk about something that would like make fun of someone that's not necessarily just like love. I think yesterday I was talking to my grandpa, it was Thanksgiving, so he was telling me all of this stuff, but there's like Guitia where it's like Guitia playing, where you like it's like romantic Guitia, and then there's like Guitia like and a lot of like Hmong blood have Guitia and hang on because of the war that a lot of Hmong populations don't have if they're not from Laos. But I think my grandpa was joking around. He was like something like more. He was saying a line and he was like, something like more or something like that. it was like all these funny things, and he was like, something else was like, he was like, oh, like you could like make fun of the girl, like, cause he was like, he knew I was going to New Year's, so he was like, oh, you have to go like sing all these guitia, right? So he was like really excited to tell me, and he was like, so a line, so when Hmong, the cool thing about Hmong linguistics, not cool, that's the wrong word, the complex thing about Hmong linguistics is a lot of the linguistics is hidden in guitia, and the people that know linguistics, the academic side of linguistics, they don't know guitia, and the people that know guitia don't know like the linguistic sides of like academia. So a lot of these Hmong vocab and Hmong like grammar is hidden in guitia. So to learn that really like shows you a different part of the Hmong language. It's kind of like if you never read English, right? If you never read and you would never know words like thereby or therefore, because those words are kind of just reserved for writing. You never really say them in spoken Hmong. It's kind of like the same in guitia and spoken Hmong. So the other day someone asked me at U of M, I was going to say this at the way beginning of the talk, but they asked me like, how do you distinguish between Hmong whistled language and Hmong just like music, right? Hmong music language and Hmong just like pure music. And I told him I was actually like, I gave a really bad answer because the short answer is that there is no such thing as traditional Hmong music without spoken words. Like you just like literally cannot play Hmong music without mimicking the language, except when you dance with the peng and you're focused on dancing and not playing the actual music. So you might play like phrases or like words, but you don't actually play something that's comprehensible. So if I had thought about this answer before, what I would have told him is Hmong music doesn't exist without the language. It would be like if I told you to write 1,000 English words, you would naturally write like a story, right? You could just write 1,000 completely random words, but you would be like, why would I ever do that? And it's the same with Hmong music. You could play, some sort of music, but why would you ever do that, right? So it's something that kind of, really kind of like changed how I even thought about music. I totally forgot what your question was already, but I went off on this tangent. Oh, can you insult someone? Yeah, so my grandpa was like, so Hmong linguistics, there's this phrase when you end every when you end every musical like sentence or song or thought, you end it with something that's like for the flute. It's usually something like oh you are oh ya, and that means like it's kind of asking a question like do you hear me or like do you get it but it also signals like I'm done talking, now you can talk, because on the leaf, for example, it's been shown in like physics that even if you have a super loud voice, you can yell like maybe across a few hundred meters, but with whistles, it can travel over a few kilometers. So that allows people to talk long distance. This is a leaf. Hmong also speak on this, and then this is a tamblong, I think. So this mimics the music of this, and this is by effect like louder than the other flutes. The joke is like if you don't know how to chomblong, then you just play one of these. But for example, when you chomblong at the end of it, if I were to say the same thing as I said on the tamblai, chandungji, I would at the lu hapao is usually something like pu 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 no. So pu 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 is. So you would say pu 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 chandungji me ga me no po po dang ne yo ka fu xia wa lo. That would be like a common phrase, right? And then at the end, maybe you would say something like "e ne po tao na o yo," and then the "o yo" signals that you're done talking, right? Right? And you also do that on the tamblai as well. So it's so "o yo o yo." And again, that's just like I'm done talking. But in Gutia, we also do that. So that's what ends it. That's what part of what makes it part of the whistle language as well. But a common phrase to end Gutia is sorry, this goes back to your point eventually. A common thing to end Gutia with is you would say something like your tea guru xie la seng, or your Jean guru me xie la seng, and la seng is you wouldn't really know that if you just speak Hmong, but even a lot of people who sing Gutia don't know what it means because they never ask. The thing about I think Hmong Americans and how we are educated in the West is we always want to know, like we're always asking questions, we're always encouraged to ask questions. So that gives like us an advantage to learning if we want to, you know. But La Seng in Hmong history. So when the Hmong people were like, when they were like the Chinese were like always not nice to the Hmong, and it was like, so there was that whole like the genocide in China that forced the Hmong southward and that migration. But how they so that weapon the la sang the Hmong tàu Hmong the lu la sang the Hmong ra của họ tròn the lời tàu Hmong the lời tàu Hmong lu la sang the du lo ra của họ tròn, and then you couldn't do anything about it because it was this weapon that the Chinese used to punish the Hmong people. So Hmong had the chỉ la sang that goes back to that story of Hmong tàu lu la sang. And then the other side of that, you know, it can mean a few different things, but it's like the opposite of if you and then you're the opposite of the most mad that you could be, right? So something they might say at the end of like if it's a happy piece of tea, you say like you're and that means right? And you say that means like and then my grandpa was like, if you're singing Pixiu with a girl and you want to kind of like insult her and like flirt with her by like kind of, you know, like insulting her a little bit, you would say something like, and then gao kind of rhyme, or you can make them rhyme by changing how the music is. So yeah, you can say things that are like kind of like insulty with the whistle language as well. I think how I mainly romanticized it is like, I didn't romanticize it in of itself, but I romanticized like life in like Laos in general. And I think that we're all guilty of that, especially as travelers. You know, we go to all of these like untouched countries or untouched cultures, and we see like people living these like rural lives, and we think, you know, it's like the simple life, but really a lot of times it's really hard to live lives like that, and you're really poor, and like it's really hard to make a living. And I think I romanticized it in that context, not the language itself, but the whole like lifestyle behind it. So I think it's also very important when I say romanticize it to be like, I say that because it reminds myself, as well as everybody else, that, you know, it's really complex, and sometimes we single these like issues to just like one really cool thing or one really bad thing, and we have to really remind ourselves that there's like a whole bigger picture in effect. Good question. Horrible answer, but hopefully that answers your question. Yeah, I think like whistle language, you know, it's, you know, again, the flute is mostly for like love, long distance communication. The ja is for, you learn what the ja was for, and then you have like you could never teach someone how to build a boat through whistle language. Like, you just couldn't do that because it's just never been used in that like context.
First of all, love your videos. Definitely live vicariously through you.
Thank you.
I think I want to know is like what are practical steps? So for me, I'm on this journey of learning to be proud of being Hmong. Never had that, but learning that, and so that's kind of a push towards wanting to travel and explore, to rediscover, as you were saying. What were your practical steps to get there, to start? I don't know if you're traveling full-time or part-time. I don't know what that looks like, but how did you start moving in that direction, or what are practical steps you took?
Yeah, you know, I think finding things that you were like proud of and interested in to begin with. For me, that happened to be like whistle languages and stuff. You know, there's the 5 people that you surround yourself with, you become those people. And, you know, I think I just really surrounded myself with people who were like proud to be like themselves, and not even just Hmong, but just like proud to be like themselves, and like owned up to being like themselves, and that really encouraged me to find like who I was. And one example was when I was traveling through Panama. So one of the first countries I traveled to and still return to regularly is Panama, and I met these, you know, in America, I think I've always had this, like, when people ask me when I'm traveling, like, where are you from? Sometimes I have this hesitation of like, am I like from Thailand because I was born in Thailand, but it was in a refugee camp, so, you know, I don't even have Thai papers, I don't speak the Thai language, I never really lived there. Or am I American? Like, I feel American, but you know, I didn't even have American citizenship till I was like 14, and like my passport still says born in Thailand, even though it like wasn't really Thailand. And you know, my family's from Laos, and then there was a whole like China history. So where am I from? And I think it wasn't until I traveled to Panama and I met Chinese Panamanians, and they were so proud to say like, I'm Panamanian. Like sometimes they wouldn't even mention that they were Chinese, and I found that for like all Panamanians. Panamanians were just like the proudest people that I have like ever met, and not in an obnoxious way, but in a way that was like so like fulfilling. And when I met like these Chinese Panamanians or like black Panamanians or white Panamanians or whatever, they didn't say like, you know, like I'm Asian American or I'm white American, black American. They just say like I'm Panamanian, and it was like, wow. And I really began talking to these people and finding out why they were so proud of like their Panamanianness. And then it really, you know, reflected back to like, yes, now I can confidently say like I'm American when I'm traveling. But it also gave me like ownership of my Hmongness and really like showed me like what it means to like have this world with a ton of different people, but all working together. So I would just say like really like surround yourself with like passionate people, not just like who are proud of like their heritage, but just like proud of their job, proud of like their hobbies, proud of just like how they live and breathe and eat. And that kind of just like resonates and bleeds into everything.
That's good.
Yeah.
Question, how old were you and where were you living and who was it that influenced you to start really studying Hmong music in such a determined and deep way?
So the question is, yeah, how old was I, and basically where I was in life that really encouraged me to travel and study the Hmong whistle languages. I think growing up, I was always that kid that was like, if you told me that I couldn't do something, then I wanted to do it like tenfold, and I wanted to like prove you wrong. So when I was growing up and I would hear my grandparents, you know, they talk about the Hmong whistle languages and playing the flute, playing the leaf, whatever, and they would like tell me, they would say it in passing, they wouldn't be like real serious about it, but they would be like, oh, you youngsters nowadays, you won't know how to speak our language through like these instruments anymore. You guys are gonna lose that part of the culture. And at the time, you know, when I was little, it bothered me because at the time it was true, because I didn't understand this language, and I was like, how do I not understand this language? Like, this is supposed to be my language, and it bothered me for years and years and years. And then when I was in college and I was really getting into learning Spanish, and I ran across a language called Silbo Gomero. It's from the Spanish Canary Islands. It's the most studied whistle language, but it's whistled Spanish. And the only place it has developed is in the Canary Islands. So when I learned about Silbo Gomero, I was like, oh, the other language I speak is also whistled. And then I began like going into this rabbit hole of whistled languages, and I traveled throughout Mexico, and a few indigenous languages in Mexico are also whistled. And I was really just interested in how you could replicate music or language through music, through whistles, because at the time I was still really frustrated on the fact that I couldn't understand Hmong as a whistled language, despite the fact that I speak Hmong. And it wasn't until I like began looking at it as a second language that I really began to understand it. And then now you know, I think when you listen to whistle languages are imperfect, as I said. So even if you have someone who's like really, really, really good at whistling and really, really, really good at listening and understanding it, they might understand like 80 to 90%. You always miss out on little words like the ums and the e's and all these what we call in linguistics, we call them discourse markers. You miss out on a lot of these little pauses and stuff in the whistle language. But it was like, now I understand, like, if I listen to a random Hmong song that's whistled, I'll understand, I always 100% understand what it's talking about. So I always understand if it's talking about a loved one, I always understand if it's talking about missing someone or like a country. I miss like those discourse markers, but I usually understand like, depending on what they say, between 70 and like 90% of what they're saying. But it wasn't until I really like saw other whistle languages that I was like, oh, this is a thing, and I can like study this more than just like, it's not just like Hmong. So I always like to place myself in like the bigger picture. So I think like seeing other whistle languages when I was specifically in college really encouraged me to do this. And then the research side of things, I think I had to know that no one was doing this work, because I always wanted to be like, oh, I wanted to know like, oh, if I do this, it's like I'm actually discovering or like documenting something new, and like it'll be like useful and that like people will learn from it. So it wasn't till I learned about other languages that did this, and then when I saw that this was something important, and then that kind of comes back to like, you know, owning my Hmongness and owning my place in the world.
So, you know, for a lot of us, we dream about crafting to a lot of these like beautiful places and wonderful places. And in a lifetime, we may only like, get to go on one, right? Or can afford to go on one. But in a year, you're able to go to, you know, different places. And so, how do you afford to go? And are you making income? And are you going to share with us?
Yeah. So the question is, how do I afford to travel full time? How do I afford to travel full time? Where does my income come from, and where do I make money, basically? There's no magic answer to this, actually. I wish there was like, you know, I waved the wand and I got $1 million, or I won the lottery. But it was really after college. I worked for 2 years. I didn't go out at all. I saved money. I like didn't buy anything. It was horrible. I think part of the reason why I didn't love my jobs was because I never was like realizing my income in terms of like I wasn't using my income. So even though I knew in my head like this is good, saving is good, like the monkey brain of me was like, you're working all these hours but you get nothing in return. And you know, during that time I like wrote and published my book, and then I like learned all these new skills, and it was a great time. But you know, I think those 2 years, it was mainly like saving money to do something that I would be happy with, whether that be like graduate school, and eventually that was traveling. But yeah, through working for 2 years full time, I saved up almost $30,000, and I had this number in my head. I was like, how much money do I need to travel for 1 year, assuming I make $0? And that number was $20,000. And I said, okay, if I can spend $20,000 and I travel for 1 year, and let's say like I make $0, it completely like I can't build anything, and I just have to like come back and like find another job. Like, am I gonna be upset with myself? And the answer to that was no. Like I didn't really love my job. I loved my job. I didn't love where I was working and living. So I was living in Monterey, and it's the most beautiful place I've ever lived, beachside town, Central California, perfect weather every day of the year, but it was like a retirement town, like a touristy town. So I had no friends, I had like no family. It was just like not a fun time, not a fun place to live. But I was like, okay, if I travel for 1 year, I'll get away from that, and I'll be happy after 1 year after 1 year, if I do nothing but just travel and see the world, I'll be happy. So that was the first step, like that emotional like assurance in myself, and that emotional like contentness of like, oh, if I like mess up, and then that's like okay. So I saved up that almost $30,000, and then I was like $20,000, right? I was still paying I actually just paid off my car like 2 months ago, but I was still paying off my car as well. So I was allotting like there was like almost $10,000 that I still had to pay for my car. So I was like okay, $20,000, $10,000 will like be like a buffer for like if I come back and I have to like pay for expenses while I find a new job. So it was like $20,000 though, 1 year, I think that's doable. So, and this was like a process that was like 6 months of like, when people ask me like, how do I quit my job? I always tell them, keep staying at your job, but quit mentally first. Like mentally quit and really like prove to yourself that you can like do something. So like do like proof of concept projects. So I created like 3 things and I sold those 3 things and I proved to myself that like, oh, people want to buy things that I create. And so then that gave me the confidence to start. And when I started, for 6 months I made $0, absolutely no money for the first 6 months. And that's when I was like starting to get worried. But after 6 months, I started making a little bit of money here and there. That was making videos for people, doing appearances, kind of endorsements, and then like also like speaking, talking, teaching, all these like kind of small gigs on the side. I make $0 from ad revenue, so it's not. I'm on Facebook and not YouTube, so no ad revenue. But it wasn't 6. It was 6 months, and I spent almost $10,000. It was 9,000 some amount of money that I spent over the course of 6 months to build something that people would start paying me for. And the most amazing thing about it, I think, it's all done on social media, and even nowadays, still to this day, I have never gone up to someone and say, hey, can you pay me to make a video for you? It's always been that like people come up to me and ask me to do some project for them or with them, and that's how I've been making my money. So through just passively putting myself out there, never having to actually ask for money, I have made enough money that, and to be honest, it's sustainable right now. Like I could travel for the rest of my life and like it would be sustainable. Obviously, I think going back to the question before, like one day I want to have a family and I want to have kids. So the idea is to build this into something bigger that can keep making money as I go back to grad school, et cetera, et cetera. So right now, like, it's like I'm the bottleneck. But the bright side of that is I've only been doing this for less than 2 years. So I think I've heard someone say that a business after 5 years, if it's still growing and surviving, and then it's like it's gonna be there forever. So I think like only 2 years. I can't really gauge too much yet, but I can say that through I guess if you want to like really like just put it into really blunt terms, you could say like yeah, I'm teaching, I'm an educator, but I'm also a lot of times like selling attention. So if I make a video, I'm selling attention, and like I get people to like look at your thing or your place or your whatever you want me to do. And my videos, if you watch them, it's not about the best visuals. Like I don't have the best visuals, it's not the most cinematographic, but it's the most, I think, like pride myself on like storytelling. So storytelling hasn't changed for like thousands of years, right? Storytelling, it's always it's an art form that it's what makes your video work. And I think through storytelling, that's how I make my money, if you want to put it in the short term. But yeah, the short answer is first I had that seed money. For some people, it's like a grant. For some people, it's someone gives them money. But for me, it was like my own money that I saved over 2 years, $30,000, spent $20,000 of it, $10,000 of it to like build something that started giving back. So yeah, I mean, I'm so open to talk about money because I feel like that was like the first big like step for me to overcome. And I think like in our society at large, we're really afraid to ask for money or ask about money because it's like an uncomfortable subject. So I think like I should walk the walk and like talk about it as well. So if you have any questions, really, like I will just like answer all of them.
Along the line of that, how like traveling costs so much. And then I've heard a lot about like credit cards and what's best to use, and I've seen a lot of your photos of like, you're like, oh, I get free food, I'm in this really luxurious place. How do you get there? Or what do you do, or what have you researched?
Yeah, so the question is, do I take any like travel perks or credit card points, travel points, all of that stuff? And yeah, so I have cards that get me like access to like lounges. So that allows me like complimentary lounge and like food and like drinks and stuff. How I got these, a lot of these cards have, let's say, like an annual fee of like, let's say $95 a year to use them. And then it was like, so it's gonna be different for everybody, but you know, usually it's something like spend $4,000 and then like you get like 60,000 points, and that's worth like $1,100, $1,200, something like that. And it was like, okay, so basically you're getting like 25% off. So I really only use these cards and get that intro bonus, it's called, if I'm gonna spend that money anyway. You know, the trick with wisely spending credit cards is don't like spend what you wouldn't be spending anyway. So there's not like magic. I think like a lot of travel hackers make it seem like you can like go to a secret website and you get like $500 off your plane ticket, but you know, that really just doesn't exist. I remember like when I started, when I wrote that like children's book and I like did a Kickstarter for it and I had to like publish it, it was like $4,000 to like pre-print these books. So I applied for a credit card and I like used that and it fulfilled the intro bonus. So then I got like $1,000 worth of points to travel. And then I think like one of my like job benefits was like a continuing education. So if my former employer hears this, I'm gonna be in so much trouble. But it was like, one of my job benefits was like, you get like continuing education money, right? So I had like graduated already, and yeah, my stem cell biology degree is from Harvard, but I applied to like the community college to take one art class, one photo class that lasted 8 hours on a Saturday, and it was like every year you got like $4,000 towards continuing education. So my excuse was like, oh, I have to take this photography class, and it's intro to photography. It costs $150 to take this class, but I also need a computer for it and a camera. It costs $4,000. Well, you guys like pay for that? And to my surprise, they said yes. So I think you know, it's not going to always happen, but what I realized is like sometimes if you just ask for it, people will just give it to you, especially if it's already there. So it's like things like that. When I'm going to buy like new camera gear, I will like apply for a credit card or new travel. You know, if I'm traveling to like Laos and it's like a ticket is like $1,100, $1,000 round trip, that's like if it's a credit card with an intro bonus of let's say like 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, and they give you like 4 or 3 months to meet it. I think like most people probably spend like $1,000 a month on something. Something that I also did was, when I was living in California, I was racking up these points by paying my rent with credit cards, and they would charge like an extra 2%, but at the end it was worth it because I still got like more money than that extra fee that I had to pay. So then by the time I started traveling, I had like $4,000 in like credit card points from like paying my rent. And you're like, is that bad for your credit? And no, it's actually good for your credit to have like a larger credit line and like more types of credit. So my credit score is about 780, so I think that's like very good, especially for my age. But yeah, there's like all these like cheats to the system, I guess you could call them. And I might be a horrible person for taking advantage of all of them, but I'm telling all of you, so I think that like negates it, right?
One more question.
Okay. Anyone else? Because I don't want to say anyone else that hasn't asked a question over here.
So one of the questions you asked, or something that you've been thinking about, is what it means to be human. And I'm curious how traveling has expanded your definition of that.
Yeah, the question is, how has traveling expanded my definition of what it means to be human and what the human condition is? So when I started Neng Now, I kind of like thought about it as like a reverse engineer thing. I was like, what do I like want to be like the picture boy of, right? And my answer, because at the time I wasn't really like happy in what I was doing, my answer was I wanted to be the picture boy of like how to live like a happy, fulfilling life. And so I was like, okay, every day I'm gonna wear this shirt with a smiley face on it because I'm gonna do like everything on social media, and this is like the most recognizable like emoji, right? It's like the first emoji, right? And it was like multi-pronged, like it served the purpose as like every time someone used a smiley emoji, I wanted them to think of Neng Now, so that was like social media strategy, but it also was like cool in that like now sometimes I travel to, let's say, Indonesia. Indonesia speaks over 300 languages. Like I'll meet someone who doesn't speak a language, who speaks a language I've never heard of, and they'll understand what this is because of social media, and they'll point to it, they'll smile, they'll laugh, and we'll have like this really like silly interaction, but it means like so much. And yeah, so I think I wanted to be like this poster boy for what it meant to live like a fulfilling life. So, and I think that's what really like the human condition is. Like in, 1,000 years, for 99.999% of us, no one's gonna remember our names. So it's really just being like the best you, whoever that is, and adding the best you to the world. And I think that is how you truly live a fulfilling life for yourself, because when you know that you've put the best of you out there, that's like fulfillment beyond just a smile and beyond just happiness, because you know that you're affecting everyone around you. So when I was a sophomore in college, I learned about this study. It's called the Harvard Happiness Study, and it was very striking because it started with Harvard sophomores in the 1920s, and I learned about it when I was a Harvard sophomore. So there's this, it's like the longest scientific study like ever done, and it's still ongoing to this day, but they wanted to figure out what makes you live a happy life. So they started with a group of Harvard sophomores, and they followed them until the day they died. And they would always check back in, and to this day, it's covered JFK, so John F. Kennedy was part of the part of the study, and then I think like some of the astronauts were, so they had like these wildly successful people, but they also had like people who ended up being like homeless, like addicted to drugs, like people who were like the smartest like Nobel Prize winners, but people who also like developed all these like mental illnesses and like were on the other side of the spectrum. So they studied people from like all these backgrounds, and what they found out after over 80 years of this study is that the number one thing that makes you happiest in life is close relationships and close connections. And so, and you're like, oh, that's not surprising at all. And the scientists were like, oh, that's not surprising at all either. But what was surprising, and like because I studied science and my background is in science, what was surprising is that these close relationships actually predicted your likeliness of developing dementia, heart disease, and like all of these other physical health problems. Your fitness level, all of that was more dependent on your close relationships, even more so than your genetics. So that was what like really blew scientists away. And when I learned about this study, I was like, okay, so, and I was living in Monterey again, I had no friends, so I was like, okay, I had no friends, what's gonna make me the happiest? And then my two goals, when I started traveling, and this was, go back to like what it means to be human for me, but my two goals was that, one, I wanted to be able to travel to any big city in the world and have a friend to call up and be like, hey, can I catch a beer with you? And I wanted there to be a yes in like every big city. And that was like my like kind of like concrete goal that I think like I've done a good job doing. And then my other like more abstract goal was, I just wanted to like be the happiest that I could be and be like the best me and like encourage other people to do that, which is kind of like a more abstract idea, but I really think that's like the human condition, is just like finding the best way that you can affect the world, and that has to do with, the language you speak, where you come from, blah, 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 all these different aspects of ourselves, but in the end, we live the happiest life if we have these close connections, and I think that's what the human condition is. And that, spans across all cultures, all weird languages, and I think it's something really beautiful. I'll stick around after this.
And then don't forget to fill out those comment cards and hand it to us. See in the back of the envelope. And please, if you haven't yet, sign the guest book for East Section Library. And I hope that you come back and visit East Section Library as well